I am Jean Kennedy Norris Scales. I've lived in North Carolina since 1959. I came to Durham, North Carolina to teach English at North Carolina College. It was then. It is now North Carolina Central University. Prior to that, I was in Texas at Prairie View College, where I grew up on a college campus. My father was a teacher of agriculture at Prairie View Agricultural and Mechanical College. He had studied at Cornell University. He had his PhD in agriculture, and he taught agriculture then at Prairie View. I grew up on a college campus among people in a very small school, really, on a college campus, because the school had people from around the school, people in the community, the farming area around the school, and people who were campus kids, as we were called. I think it was interesting to grow up in a community school. We called it the Prairie View Training School. Back then, it was the Rosenwald schools that were all through the South, and these were founded to help blacks in the South in education. So I grew up in the training school, and then I went to Prairie View College, where I grew up, and finished there, ended up with a BA in English in 1951. After that, I went to the University of Iowa in Iowa City, Iowa, where I got the Master of Arts in Journalism in 1953. I would like to say something about my name because I think it's significant. My name, Kennedy, comes from my great-grandparents who were born into slavery. And my mother wanted me to have their name. So she insisted to my father that my middle name be Kennedy. And I think that's significant, because I think that's an important past for me to remember. I wrote a poem. I was writing poetry when I was quite young. In fact, the college minister would have me read my poetry on the Sunday Vesper services, the Sunday worship services, with an organ playing in the background and all of that. I wrote a poem named Amalgam. And in that poem, I ended in a sense that mankind is one. Now, I never heard of the faith, but why was I saying that? I don't know. It's interesting that when I was in Iowa, one of the people who taught me piano, my minor was music at Prairie View, my major was English, and one of the teachers who was my piano teacher, he asked if I had any poetry that I could show him. I showed him the poem Amalgam, when I was talking about mankind being one, and he liked that poem. So he used that poem as a basis for his dissertation in music. It has a choir in the background, it has orchestral background, and so I've never heard it, but he gave me the manuscript, so that poem is a basis of his dissertation at the University of Iowa. I became exposed to the Baha'i faith through my friend from the third grade. I was born in Kentucky, in Frankfort, Kentucky, where my father taught at Kentucky State. We went to Prairie View, and we moved to Prairie View in 1937. And that's when I grew up at Prairie View. There I met someone who was also in the third grade, and her name was Mary Helen Mickens. So we became very close friends, very close friends. Later, we went through college together at Prairie View. She moved away to Houston. I went to Iowa to graduate school. And when she heard of the faith from Elsa Norton, a German lady who grew up in England, she came and told me about the faith. She brought all these books and spread them out. I remember we were sitting in the middle of the bed and all these books around us. And I was really puzzled. I don't know what she's talking about. It was just kind of, okay, this is something that's very important to Mary Helen. So I was trying to show interest. And I guess she had a catalog. So I ordered one book just to show interest for her. And I ordered Divine Art of Living. That is significant that I ordered that book, because that had a role in what I'm going to say now. Divine Art of Living was one that I she asked me to read at her father's funeral. I took that one book because I thought that would please her to read from that book. I took it and I read, and when I looked at her, her face was radiant. I said, how in the world could she have a radiant face when I knew the year before she had lost her sister, and now she's lost her father, and yet she's radiant. And all I could think, it must be that faith. How could she be radiant? And then to death to me at that time was a horrible experience. horrible something to try to understand. So she told me about the faith. That was the first inkling. There must be something in this faith. Later, she asked me, I said she kind of gave up on me because I didn't show any particular interest after that. But then she asked me to invite some of my students at Prairie View. I was teaching there from 57 to 59 at Prairie View University in Texas. It became a university after A&M College. She asked me to invite some of my students and colleagues to my home for a fireside. So I invited another professor. I invited some of my students, and it's interesting, I have the very letter that I wrote asking those students to be excused by the Dean of Women, Dean of Men, to come to my house. I said, oh, there's that letter. I know the exact date when this happened. Now, that's important that I mentioned this experience, because at that fireside, she was trying to explain the faith. Now, here's my dearest friend explaining the faith. And at that moment, she was having difficulty explaining it. At that moment, she was struggling, so I jumped in with my little teaspoon of knowledge about the faith, and I was trying to help my friend explain the faith. At that moment, I had an epiphany. Oh my God, this is true. And it so happened, there's so many coincidences in life that we can't understand. I tell people in older age, it's like a tapestry. You don't know what this red strand needs, the blue and the green. And then later in your older age, you can look at it and say, oh, there's a pattern, there's a reason. We can understand our successes, our failures, our hurts, our heartaches, our joys. We can see the pattern. There's something there, a power is working from above that we don't understand. It so happened that a man who had been over the training school came back to Prairie View with his daughter. They had lived in the same neighborhood at Prairie View. And I told Beverly Ann Wright, that was Howard Wright, was her father, who was over the training school. I said, Beverly, I'm coming to Durham next month, and I want two things. And I said, I want the name of a beautician, and I want the name of a Baha'i. So she gave me the name of Mrs. Van Sambeek. So when I got to town, a few days after I got settled into the faculty cottage on campus, I called Mrs. Van Sambeek, and she invited me to a fireside. Mrs. Van Sambeek was a remarkable lady. I wrote an article on her that is in Baha'i World. It's a red volume, and it tells about Mrs. Van Sambeek's life. She decided after Mr. Bechtel died that she would marry Mr. Van Sambeek, who was a Dutchman, from the Netherlands, and they moved to Durham, North Carolina to teach the faith, to spread the faith, the faith of unity and love and harmony. Of all the Baha'is that I've met, I can't think of another one who had more of the balance of living the life and teaching the faith. In fact, that is what I tried to bring together in that article. I mentioned at the beginning of that article that in one of the firesides that I attended at our house, she had in our home a young lady from Africa who had been in a tuberculosis ward at Duke. She had visited her many times, and then when she got out, she invited her into our home for the weekend. And Ludmila, in her characteristic way, was wandering around the group, and it could be 20, 30 people in the living room, some in saris, some in their various native attires. And she was talking about the faith, what it stands for: peace, harmony, love, looking to the future, a piece of the realization of the promises of the different holy books. And without stopping from talking about the faith, I remember she took a pillow and put it behind the student's back, and kept on talking, as though her line of thought was never broken. So I said, that is the moment. So when I had to write that, when Mag Carney asked me to write that article for the American Baha'i, and then later it was used in Baha'i World, I said, that is that moment. That captures the essence of Ludmila. Live the life, but also teach the faith. Just don't teach the faith and not live the life. You've got to do both. The sit-in started in Raleigh 1 week before they started in Durham. If I remember correctly, it was a Monday in Raleigh where you had that 4 men sitting at the Woolworths in Greensboro. That was 1960. All right, and then in Durham, they started 1 week later. When I turned on the radio that morning in Durham when they started, I said, oh my goodness. What Bahá'u'lláh said about justice, this age is coming. And I said, oh my goodness, this faith is true. I called Mrs. Van Sambeek. I decided to become a Baha'i. But the day of declaration was February 7th, 1960. And may I read my declaration? I think it's important. When I was writing my will a few months ago, and the will has, of course, the Baha'i symbol, of course, the greatest name. It also has a statement from the person whose will it is. And when I remembered, I wrote a statement when I declared the faith. And I read it, and I thought, oh, I can't say it better now. I've been a Baha'i now 54 years. This is what I believe. And this is what I said February 7th, 1960. I hereby declare my belief in the Baha'i faith after nearly 4 years of contact through discussion, reading, prayer, and meditation. I assert this belief because I recognize that the writings of the Bab, Baha'u'lláh, and Abdu'l-Baha contain all-encompassing truth, that the tenets of the faith are goals which are goals of all the great religions. All the great religions have anticipated by their very teachings, and that the various manifestations of God are individual reflections of the single creative guiding force of the universe. Further, I believe that the faith definitively points the way towards personal wholeness in an age otherwise fragmented and incomprehensible, that each individual can and is intended to speed the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth, and that after life, death is but a door to an increasingly meaningful existence and closeness to the Creator. Considering the various facets of the faith through meditation and logic leaves me firmly aware that this declaration of belief is both the most important decision of my life and the greatest blessing. Jean Kennedy Norris, February 7th, 1960. So that's what I took to Raleigh for declaration. And I'd like to say this, because I think it's very important, that I could not have served this faith. I could not have finished the PhD at UNC without Jay. He was there, taking me places, doing things, interceding when I needed to really study. And so he was there. Jay and I met back in, I guess soon, Jay came to Durham from having worked out of state somewhere. But then he ended up driving cabs for I can't remember the name of that, Pine Street cabs. And it so happened that one time he picked me up, I called a cab, I didn't have a car, and he took me to the beauty shop. It's one of those hairdressing times. And he told me this story later, but he tells it in an interesting way. He said he let me out at the beauty shop, and he was surprised that I was so friendly. You know, he thought I was saying that I was Dean Norris, but I was really saying Jean Norris. And I remember he told me that he was a Muslim. I said, oh, but I think that was the time that he told me that. I said, oh, in the Baha'i faith, we're supposed to learn more about Islam. And so I gave him a Baha'i book, Prescription for Living, I think it was there. And so he said when he let me out that first time, where have I seen her before? He told me this, and this is significant, that he had prayed for a wife. He didn't know whether he was going to have to go to an Eastern country as a Muslim or where he was going to find a wife. And he said, God, show me my wife. And he said in a dream when he was in Boston, he saw me. He didn't tell me this till after we married, 7 years later, that he had seen me. in that dream. And he was saying one time I was acting up, as he was saying, and he said, she doesn't know, but she's going to marry me. He became a Baha'i in 1969. He became a Baha'i, really. We were married in April of Jay and I were married in April 4th, the first anniversary of Martin Luther King's death. We were married April 4th in Houston, Texas, 1969. And he became a Baha'i in October of that same year. In fact, it was interesting. We were celebrating World Peace Day, and so I was so anxious we're going to have World Peace Day at our house. We had then moved in from the apartment that we were living into Ms. Van Sandvik's house, which he had sold to us. And so I was getting refreshments ready. I was getting everything laid out. Oh, we've got to sit down and have prayers. Nobody came. So nobody came. But we don't know what effect it may have on others. I said, well, maybe Jay was the one. He was helping me with refreshments and helping me do all these things. And so he became a Baha'i. So I think it's interesting. The power of prayer, the efficacy of prayer. I learned that from Mrs. Van Sandvik, I think. She would pray with a fervor that is just amazing, with an intensity. And some people, such as Evelyn Arbo, remember when you said prayers, you didn't slouch in a chair, get erect. You are speaking with your Creator. There you had to be reverent. I think we have to think of prayer as being the most powerful force. I can't remember who the inventor was who said that, but he said this is the most powerful force in the universe, most powerful. And I don't think we understand it. And sometimes we pray for specific things when we're younger and more immature. But we need to pray, what is God's plan? And I think we have to realize the power of it. We have to realize that we have to become detached and accept what God gives and try to understand, well, how is this going to work for my spiritual development? Because I think the main point is for us to grow spiritually. And some of the most hurtful experiences, some of our failures, are the things that are most meaningful in the long run. I think we have to see, too, that through prayer, we are being prepared for the real life, and that is a spiritual life after we leave this world. This is only that preparatory period. In fact, I think in the Baha'i writings when it says that just as in the womb a child is developing arms and legs and all these things that become a part of the human body, and he might not have any idea, of course, well, what do these things mean? Why do I have them? And yet, when he's born into this world, all these things become apparent, why we need these things that we have. The holy books tell us we need to develop mercy and justice and love and all of these things, and patience and all of these things. So we're told in the holy books that we need these things because these are the things that we will need as the spiritual limbs as such in the next world. So I think prayer helps guide us to that which we need, not only in this world, but in the world to come, which is the real world. I had an experience when my father died, and I think that's significant because I never had a vision before. Some people talked about visions. I said, oh, I wish I could have a vision. But when my father died in 1993, the year after the Second World Congress, September that year, I remember a few days after he died, I said, Daddy, you're the person I know best in this next world. Tell me, show me that you're all right. And I just said it like that. About a year and a half later, my mother became ill. She was in the hospital about half an hour. I'd have to drive down to see her in the hospital. And this day I was so tired. I think being a caregiver can really be very wearing. So I was driving down and I was so tired that I just kept going off the road. I said, oh, my goodness, I can't, how am I going to drive back home if I'm this tired? So when I got down to Mother's hotel room, I sat in a comfortable chair. You know how these comfortable chairs in the hotel, the hospital room. And my mother was napping. And I closed my eyes. I said, I've got to get myself together to be able to drive back home. And a light, just like a light, a round circle of light, brilliant light came in. And my father's face was in the light. I remember it looks like he had a white cloth, folded back like that on his head. He looked healthier and happier than I'd ever seen him in this life. That's Daddy. And I looked at Mother. I wondered, did she see him too? She was napping. So it was just for me to see. And he stayed just long enough for me to see him and then disappeared. My God. It was just amazing. And so to me, years later, I said, he was showing me I'm okay. I think I'm going back to my statement of declaration. I think that being a Baha'i is the greatest blessing in the world. That we cannot thank God enough for being able to recognize that all the promises are being fulfilled. All those things in the Bible, we are growing closer. We're talking about the world coming together. We've had the unity of the family. We've had the unity of a tribe, the clan. We've had the unity of the city-state. We've had the unity of the nation. And now Baha'u'lláh is calling us into a higher unity, the unity of planet Earth, where we are one people, we are one body. So I can say this is the greatest blessing. Can't thank God enough. Can't thank. Oh, no. That's all I can say. Yes. That's all I can say. Everybody has a spiritual journey. I want to share with you a little bit about mine. There are some moments in our lives that are indelibly printed in our minds. In 1957, 60 years ago, I was at Jarvis Christian College in Hawkins, Texas, at a prayer meeting. The leader of the prayer meeting passed around paper crosses. We were around a bonfire, and she asked us to put on that paper cross a wish, something we were praying for, and to throw the paper cross in the fire and to have faith that the prayer would be answered. I did that and took an extra cross so I wouldn't forget. I wrote on what I asked for. For some reason, I asked for knowledge of thy plan. I don't know to this day why I wrote that, but I did. I put that prayer out of my mind, really. But 3 weeks later, and I saw no connection, my best friend, Mary Helen Mickens, came to visit me at Prairie View, where we both grew up on the college campus. She was very excited about finding this wonderful faith that talked about the oneness of mankind and a vision of the earth that was just so beautiful. She had all these books, and I listened to her, mainly really to please her. I didn't look into the faith. That was her faith. 2 years later, 1959, she asked to have a meeting at my house and to invite some of my students and a colleague, and I did. She explained to them that vision and gave the name Bahá'u'lláh, a strange name to me. And she was having difficulty in getting over a point. And so, for my friend's sake, I jumped into the discussion. Oh my God. It was like an earthquake within. Oh my God, this is true. I began reading probingly. I began praying fervently. I began meditating deeply. That meeting was on May 17th, 1959. 4 months later, I came here to what was North Carolina College at that time. And in Durham, I met a lady from Vienna, Austria, Mrs. Ludmila van Zambik. She had become a Baha'i in 1922 in New York City. She had joined the NAACP and was very active in that. She was a courageous person. She came here when segregation was the rule of the day, and certainly of this area. She had gatherings in her home. I began attending them. There were students and administrators and faculty from North Carolina College, from Duke University, and from the city. And most of all, I remember there were students from the International Club at Duke. They came from countries in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, in South America, many of them in their native attire. Ludmila walked among the crowd and talked about our spiritual oneness. This earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. One country? This echoes what Kathy Lee shared so beautifully, our oneness. I read, I prayed, I meditated. On February the 7th, 1960, I went to church, and I walked out very slowly, thinking all the way home, finding connections between Christianity and the Baha'i faith that I had not thought of so deeply before. That night, I sat down and I wrote a statement of belief in Baha'u'lláh and his vision of the world that was coming. That statement is at the front of my final will and testament. The next day, February 8th, the sit-in started here. Our students were down at Woolworth's at the lunch counter. They were not being served. They were insulted, abused, but they sat in. They stood up for justice. Baha'u'lláh had said, "The best beloved in my sight is justice." I thought, you cannot have peace in this world. You cannot have unity in this world without justice. Who is Baha'u'lláh? He is the rock at the center of my being. In 1968 and in 1974, I was in the Holy Land.
I went over on the Sea of Galilee to Capernaum, where the beloved Jesus Christ walked and taught. He said, I have many things to tell you, but you cannot bear them now. But when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will lead you to all truth, to all understanding. Who is Bahá'u'lláh? He is the Spirit of truth. Who is Bahá'u'lláh? He is the bearer of that plan, the plan for which I prayed at that prayer meeting years before. He is the bearer of that plan that will bring unity and that long prophesied peace to the inhabitants of planet Earth. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
And oh, so mellow. Try to remember the kind of September when grass was green and grain so yellow. Try to remember the kind of September when you were a young and mellow fellow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Try to remember when life was so tender that no one wept except the willow. Try to remember when life was so tender that dreams were kept beside your pillow. Try to remember when life was so tender that love was an ember about to billow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. It's nice to remember, although you know the snow will follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember, remember, our hearts should remember